Good morning. We will start up in a couple or 3 minutes. We're still waiting for one person then. Lovely Patty Wells has just joined us.
Excuse me, can you come to me up that coffee shop is beyond my coastal skills?
Isn't that what Starbucks is for? Because that's where I got mine this morning.
No, I was eating in the coffee
Ah.
shop and
The coffee shop here is special.
Oh, it was.
There
That's
is
why I
to
ate.
say about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's why I ate at Starbucks this morning.
yeah, I work for the city, and when I have to go say we don't just go to Starbucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife absolutely detests Starbucks. If I want to burn my coffee, I just take a flamethrower to it.
yes.
You mean Charbucks?
Yeah, Starbucks, yes,
That's what my husband called them.
pretty well.
When you're just getting tea, though, it's just fine.
Exactly. That's all I get.
Yeah, it's tough to ruin hot water.
No. Yeah, they're able to hear us. Yeah. Or at least the guy that does their tech showed up and.
Yeah, my favorite is always hot chocolate, and they never, when they have curds or such, they never give you cups for hot chocolate. It just be so easy to do, and they don't. Well, I thought we had a person who was going to be operating this for tech.
I believe he just set it up. Can you guys hear us on Esther? I don't know if you're still on.
I don't know if this is hooked up or not.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So,
Hello, so it is, great.
Hello.
Yeah. So Esther can hear us.
Sure.
And
You guys can share that. Of course.
yeah.
Yeah, at least for now, and if he shows up else.
I don't know that you need to. You and I can share.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get going. First, of course, introductions. Patty, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Patty Wells, and my sponsorship and grant experience started in my professional job with writing 1 million grants for a small nonprofit I was running and getting one of them to fund a counselor for a year. But I've mostly been working on in-kind donations and sponsorships for conventions.
And hello, my name is Bruce Farr. My main sponsorship experience is trying to get them, of course, over the years. World Fantasy for WesterCon, for SMOFCon last year. And a lot of what I'll be relating has to do with, of course, small scale stuff, such as we did for the Santa Rosa SMOFCon.
Hi, my name is Jessica Coyle. And my day job is that I work for Albuquerque Museum, which is part of the city of Albuquerque, doing public programming. So as part of that, I write a lot of grant and sponsorship proposals. I'm also the assistant chair of BubanaCon, which is Albuquerque's local science fiction convention.
And my name is Deb Geisler, and my association with running conventions, fan-run conventions, started with dealing with grants and in getting some grants for World Science Fiction Convention in 1989. And so I've done some of that since, and I also do it as part of my regular job as a university professor.
And you'll out there that's available to you, not absolutely required. There will be no tests or anything. And it's basically just material to kind of give us some ideas of what to talk on. It's not a recap of what we'll be talking about today. It's just, again, some notes that we'll speak to. So I'm just going to go through and comment on the first one. And I'm going to ask the question of each of us in turn. Who are the customers that we have for seeking sponsorships? In other words, who are we trying to serve? I'll start with opposite order, Deb.
I guess I don't know exactly what you mean by who are we trying to serve. Is are these the people we're trying to fund? Provide
the people that
for?
when we're trying to get sponsorship money, is it for a particular, is it basically you're trying to find out who the customer is that you're serving, such as a department,
Okay.
the convention overall, a whim of a board of directors, tax reasons you may be going for particular things which are, I shouldn't say tax, government entities trying to do what they wish to do? Who are we most wanting to serve in looking for sponsorships?
Well, um, hmm. I always believe that everything that we do should be aimed at helping support the convention as a whole. And so even if the sponsorship is going to be useful for, say we have somebody saying, somebody offering to do some kind of sponsorship, and what we want is to provide really spiffy lanyards for people. That's not necessarily going to serve registration, even though the sponsorship is eventually going to end up there. Instead, it's something that's going to serve the whole convention. So I tend to take a holistic approach of useful sponsorship for the convention as a whole and for our goals. So,
as I say, it all comes back to what are your goals for seeking this sponsorship, funding, grant, whatever. Like I said, as I work for the city of Albuquerque, every grant I write has to benefit the, biggest population, and I have to show, okay, I'm targeting this audience, it's this percentage of our population, this is why I'm going for this particular grant, who it will benefit. So starting with your customers isn't necessarily how I view grant writing as the first step. You need to know what your goal is for the grant and what your overall mission is for your organization before you look at who the customers you're going to serve with that grant money is.
Then let's turn this on its side and go, okay, who exactly are the people we're trying to serve, but where are you starting from a grant? I started from a viewpoint of what the convention needed, as the members, the convention committee, et cetera, and then determine whether or not that's something within our scope that we can actually go out and achieve. Patty, what did you do in grant seeking? What was your impetus?
For us, we usually deal with things like wish list items that we have our budget, we know what will balance, and we want to add this X thousands of dollars onto it to do something. And we'll start with something like that. But at the same time, when I've been doing research, and again, I've done more looking for in-kind than formal grant writing for conventions. If I know what the entire wish list is, and I look up and talk to somebody and they can't do what the number 1 item is on my list, but they can come up with the number 5 item.
Andy, if you could introduce yourself, please.
My apologies, breakfast ran a little late and we looked at the clock. It's like, what time is it? Oh, 5 minutes after, you're late. I'm Andy Trembley. I've worked on various bids and various world cons. My sponsorship thing is a little bit, for WorldCon we had other people to do sponsorship stuff. My sponsorship thing is far more on small scale for other things. We ran a World Fantasy Con Suite and did a big sponsorship push to get discounts to turn a $5,000 con suite budget into a retail about $9,000 or $10,000 con suite budget. And that is, like as Patty said, the in-kind stuff, or finding vendors for stuff you're going to have to buy. Finding vendors where you can get an agreement of getting discounts, ideally massive discounts, on the stuff that you need to bring in, because turning $5,000 into $10,000 worth of food is a great thing.
I want to give a particular anecdote that Andy was reminding me of that I'd forgotten until now. One of the World Cons, the tech provider was very, very expensive, about double, which is typical, about double what the budget was. And one of the things we did is we said, well, how about if we have you as a sponsor? And we'll put up banner, do other things to acknowledge it, do acknowledgement of the program book on the force of the convention and all that. So we got about $20,000 discount on the cost of equipment rental with that agreement with relatively little cost. Again, going back to anecdotes.
A lot of it also in terms of sponsorship goes back to relationships. I know like at BubanaCon, we're really lucky. We have a local science fiction book group that the convention and the local science fiction organization kind of co-sponsor and advertise. And it meets every month at Jason's Deli, and it's across the street from our convention hotel. And because they see us all the time, we have good relationship with the manager. They donate food every year. They give us coupons for convention attendees to walk across the street and go to the. So it's all about, you know, making a point of having a conversation, developing a relationship, patronizing a business, and they're much more likely to work with you then when you have that relationship in place.
Add to that, in Portland, when the craft beer industry was just popping up, and suddenly there were breweries everywhere. I don't drink, but my friend Debbie does. And so she and her husband had visited all these pubs, and then she followed it up by visiting all these distributors and explaining about the Clarion charity we run. And because exactly what you said, because Debbie and Paul had been in there drinking and talking to them about their beers, we had several years where every time there was a new brewery pop up, we would get free beer. And we would cheerfully use it for Sue Petrie events.
Okay. Another anecdote. This was conventions we were doing in Phoenix again during the era of the pop-up and new small craft breweries and such. We had what then was a small craft brewery show up locally. I forget the name of it because I don't drink beer, but they were very popular in Phoenix suddenly, and they're now a nationwide brand, but they were only in a few cities. They were very eager to promote. So we, for 2 conventions, had basically free beer from them. We had like 3 or 4 kegs given to us to give out in the con suite, and we had the insurance that would allow us to do that without risk to the convention. So seeing what promotions happen around you with other events, such as we saw this being done at a non-science fiction convention, inspired us to go out and talk to that brewery and say, hey, you're doing this for others. Here's several hundred people will be here who like beer and give you some exposure. They're from all over the region. So this is a good opportunity for you. So letting them know the opportunity, what they get is of course half or 2/3 the fight.
We actually did something very similar to that at the last Scottish WorldCon. And so Esther should pay attention and make sure that it happens for this one. And that is that we actually bought the entire output of a brewery for several weeks. And they gave us really deep discounts. And of course, we put their name everywhere. And this was as part of the fanzine lounge, the fan lounge. And it was marvelous social space and great beer. And the only problem was that people could not leave immediately and get more beer because we drank them out.
Yeah, we drank them dry in 4.5 days. We drank them dry in 4.5 days, 2 weeks before the Glasgow Beer Festival.
Yep.
So the only thing they had left was what has already been sent out in their retail distribution channel, which was not necessarily great for them, but
Great for us. Oh, see, that's even better.
so, but yeah, it building, especially on the small scale, the in-kind stuff, building relationships is basic. I know a lot of people they would rather go and figure out and learn how to write a grant and send out paper and not actually deal with people, because dealing with people is dealing with people. But going out and building relationships with your local businesses is the road to at least to getting the stiff discounts. And it depends on your event. So for World Fantasy, I could go and pull out a letter on letterhead with our tax ID number on it, noting that we were a 501c3 tax exempt nonprofit, and say, we're doing this event. It's pulling in 1,000 people. It's pulling in 1,000 people from around the world. It's pulling in the case of when I'm looking to the wine and liquor people, it's like, it's pulling in writers. Writers drink. And in general, but we want to showcase, we want our con suite, our our hospitality to showcase the stuff that is local to the Bay Area. And so we could get some crazy things. Chris Cosentino, Encanto Restaurant, Boccaloni Salameria. Like, we didn't have bologna sandwiches. We had Chris Cosentino's mortadella for sandwiches for the price for only a little more than Oscar Mayer bologna. So it was all about working the angle of, we know for the convention that this is something that our convention goers like, and we know that if our conventions like this and they will talk that, and this will become a decent new set of people who know about you. We got a case of absinthe donated, and another case at half price.
I want to just talk a little bit about at a little bit higher level for a minute. Just one point that I think needs to always be kept in mind with sponsorships. You need to have someone actually in charge of sponsorships. They can have other jobs, but you need to have a central point of contact and someone who likes to keep notes, so you know what sponsorship opportunities are being pursued. And of course, some sort of a record and log of the actions are being taken and contact information, so that you have an orderly progress, system going to keep tabs on what you're doing to obtain sponsorships. It also is good to share it to the convention committee, because the single biggest resource I've always found for sponsorships is the members in the committee. And if you have this list available, sometimes they'll jog their memories. And they'll go, well, hey, I work for Google. Have you approached Google? You know, I'm chairing a convention and I'd like to do a party. What do you need for us to do in order to be a sponsor of the convention? Yes, publicity.
Not that short. This is Kathy, and I guess on that, Bruce, I'm wondering if if anyone on the panel or you yourself have advice on. So, say your committee member goes, "Hey, have you thought about approaching Google?" And typically, my response is, "Why, yes, I have thought about it, but I'm not sure who." And generally speaking, they also have no idea. They're just like, "That seems like a cool idea." So, I guess. I get for the in-kind donations, the relationship building and how to go out and do that. But if you're trying to maybe get slightly more than that, and you know, in Seattle, like I know Amazon is there and Microsoft and Google and all of these people, but I would have no idea how to start.
Now, Andy, oddly enough, was very involved in a convention that got Google as a sponsor.
Though Kate did most of that work.
Yeah, the important thing here is once you identify the connection that gives you the in, and of course, you've got to sometimes knock on a lot of doors to find it. Then you've got to have someone like Kate Hatcher who will doggedly pursue them and actually ask for it. The number one thing with everything in life is remember to ask for it.
Well, it depends on who your connection inside the company is. I mean, okay, I work for a state agency in a university, and we don't do granting type thing. But I happen to be one of the people in the organization that other people call because they know that I don't have that I may not have the answer that they need, but I know everybody and know who has the answer. And when they say that, if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I work for Amazon, and I wonder if we could get some grants from Amazon," I mean, the first person to ask them is, who's the person who you go to, who's Tyrion Lannister, who drinks and knows things, and go to that person to start out and figure out what's going on. With Google, we were actually approached by some folks in their executive level in their research, which turned out to be a completely different stream of grants and sponsorship and revenue than what everybody would expect to have from Google. So when someone says that, it is never fun throwing it back at them. But if you throw it back at them in terms of who do you know who knows lots of things about the company, and can we start this? Can we start moving through and find the right person? That's a good step. So.
I think that a lot of it can start with who is working for a company. I know that when we've gotten money from a few tech companies, not much, a little bit, but actually the most lucrative thing that happened for me was when I was running the Reno WorldCon, one of my division heads was working for Microsoft, and he got yeah, they don't, but this is not to say that other companies don't. That at that time they were reimbursing people for every volunteer hour they did, and this guy was in the events division head.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like we've missed one piece here, and that is that when someone comes and asks and all that, do you have the materials ready to identify yourself as you are a 501c3 and you've got the paperwork, you have written out something of what your mission statement is, what you do that's of value, and have 5 or 6 different things that talk about, we do this that would appeal to this kind of funder, we do this that, I did it as a mix and match kind of thing. And you can get a lot of that information from your hotel liaison, because they can tell you how many people attend the convention and hopefully a few demographics. You can get some of that from your program person as to what kind and how all of the program you run, and get something together so that if you do find somebody, you have something to give them that explains why you're worthwhile to give something to in the first place.
So I was just say, if you don't know somebody who works for the company, if it's just hey, this company is here and they're great and we think our mission aligns with what they would be interested in sponsoring, the easiest place to start is go to Google and plug in the name of the company and community sponsorship. Mm-hmm. All large companies, banks, places like Google, Amazon have a web page page that's part of their website that will say exactly who they're interested in sponsoring, what the requirements are, what the dates are. Obviously, if you're I'll pick on BubanaCon. We're about a 700 to 800 person convention. It's a small thing. I also work for the city of Albuquerque. If both of us approach, Nucinda Federal Credit Union, who's a local grantor that gives, kind of $2,000 and $5,000 community sponsorship for arts events. If I approach them as Albuquerque Museum and I approach them as BubanaCon, Albuquerque Museum as a city of Albuquerque has a 10-year history of working with them to fund various programs. And as BubanaCon, we have never approached them. They don't know who we are, what we're about. It's going to be a lot harder sell than if you know someone on the inside, but you never know. I've applied for national level grants thinking, oh, we're a regional museum. I'm going to be competing against the Smithsonian. I'm going to be competing against MoMA. And we've gotten those grants and they haven't. You never know. But it is much more of an uphill slog if you don't know someone inside and you're a smaller organization.
I'm going to answer something that Patty was bringing up about opportunities and all that. I did sponsorships for conventions decades ago, and it gave me special incentive because this is one where I actually own the right to do the convention with my partner, and it accrued to us, which gave us the incentive to actually spend the money on the members, so people would say, hey, you did a good job. So one of the things we did is we went, well, we need a document that lays everything out as to what we can offer, what we're about, what kind of sponsorship opportunities are out there, and what people typically do. We did about a 4 or 5 page document that told everyone, if you want to donate books, here's how you do it. Here's what you get out of it. Do you want to sponsor an author to attend the convention? Want to buy a program book or a PR ad? Do you want to sponsor the Consuite for a night? Do you want to do a party at the convention? We laid out all the things we'd ever seen done at World Fantasy and laid out the arguments to encourage them to in fact do it, and then got this document to publicity departments for all the publishers, et cetera. And back in those days, we got about 20,000 worth of ads for program books for World Fantasy. Of course, in those days, we actually had publishers who were solvent too.
I had a situation where we were looking for certain kinds of specific sponsorships. And this was for the World Science Fiction Convention in 2004. And one of our people worked for NASA. And so you go, oh, he works for NASA. Well, he didn't necessarily work in that area for NASA, but he knew people who knew people. And that was for us one of those areas where it wasn't just a blind thing, but it was worth doing the research. And it took a while. But in the end, NASA offered us one of two possibilities. The first one was we could get an inflatable model shuttle, but it was 65 feet tall. And the only place we could put it inside the Heinz Convention Center was right in the middle of the dealer's room. It would have sucked up huge amounts of space. The other thing they offered us was a display and moon rock. So we got the display and the moon rock. And that was the coolest thing I ever owned for 5 days, was a moon rock. So it's worth, you know, I think we probably spent 6 months doing the massaging there. And the other thing that we did is we gave retro Hugos that year. And one of the retrospective Hugos was given to Werner von Braun. And it ended up on the display in the Werner von Braun part of the museum down in Mobile, Alabama. So it was very cool, you know. So if you pick a particular company that you know is going to be a rich fund for exactly what you're looking for, I think it's worth all that massaging.
Gotta say, an important point to me again is not only do you identify opportunities to pursue them, you cast your net out to see what's ever been done in the past by any convention anywhere as a source for ideas. And more than anything, when you're doing sponsorships, you shouldn't be shy. One of the advantages I've always seen with sponsorship person who's successful is they're not afraid to get a no for an answer and then move on, or find a way to turn it into a yes.
So listening to Bruce, there's something that he said that I want to take in a weird direction. Cool. But it's no, this is one of those things that until I finish with my statement, this is something that won't make any sense. But you should consider, okay, this is only good for North American conventions that have a party culture. At least internally, even if you don't tell them this, you should think of your party hosts as sponsors, because your party hosts are coming in and they are spending their own money and doing their own work to make your convention better. They are providing a service at your convention that you probably couldn't provide directly much because of either expense or liability questions, and they are providing something that a lot of your attendees want. So that is, it's a weird perspective on things, but viewing your party, at least internally, viewing your party hosts as sponsors rather than just a task you have to deal with. It is, like I said, having been a party host and having been a convention runner, the amount that other people make your convention nightlife better can be amazing.
I want to amplify on that for a second. Chicago WorldCon. I was.
Oh, that was a fun fiasco.
Yeah.
The latest one, right?
The latest one, yeah. My wife was party maven, and she basically brought stuff to the people doing parties. We solicited parties and actively tried to get people to do parties. And we actually had a budget and provided them with material, support of various sorts, ensured the parties were posted and all that. So we indeed, in that case, I don't think we quite got to the point of looking at them as sponsored, but we looked at them as something that was important to ensure occurred because people look forward to them at conventions. And if you make the job easier, there'll be more of them. And we had a lot of them.
You definitely Chicago definitely looked at party hosts as an investment.
Yes.
So.
If I could add in, just kind of expanding on that a bit, you go to everyone you know, even when you things to work. I couldn't have been more surprised when Farino Friends of Felt underwrote Tricky Pixie for me as musical guests. I thought when I went to talk to them, even though these were two of my oldest friends, I assumed that they did not have enough money in the group, and they would say, "Oh, well, we'll give you a couple of $100s."
Do not update.
And as it turned out, they underwrote Tricky Pixie, and I was going, okay.
Yeah, but nobody's seeing that because unless that's, we're only seeing that. We don't care.
Anyone who's online, we're having a computer issue at the minute.
We haven't. We're actually not. We're just having an update warning on the screen.
Oh,
and that can
okay.
float there.
Oh, good.
That's no
okay.
big deal.
A point, by the way, I wanted to make sure we interjected. There's some times when you should say no to doing a sponsorship. There are cases where you don't want to have, the Hugo Awards brought to you by Daw Publishing or something like that. You don't want to have an obvious or even subtle conflict of interest occurring when you go ahead and choose a sponsor, because a sponsor is someone you vetted as official part of the convention. So you want to keep their involvement to be less controversial as possible, least controversial as possible. Comments?
We've had situations like that. We had a
Yes.
situation like that with Hugo's years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like Caesar's wife. It's not enough that you be as hands-off as possible. It's not enough that you are actually objective. You have to seem to be objective as well. And your sponsors, if you're doing it right, you're going to thank them. You're going to make them a public part of your convention. And so you really need to consider, is this a group that I want to be connected to for the whole convention for this particular thing? If it's a sponsorship from Michael's craft shop for your for some of the stuff that you're doing with your children's area, your masquerade, that's probably less problematic because it's simply a vendor. But in other cases, you really do need to exercise a chunk of caution there.
I'll just go ahead and just throw in a quick anecdote. One of the sponsorships we look at for SMOFCon always is future SMOFCons and other future conventions. And I know this convention's done some of that. In Santa Rosa, we did a bunch of that also. And of course, at WorldCons, future conventions throw parties. Sometimes it will do a sponsorship for the con suite or bring in food to supplement what the con suite does.
Yeah. So in addition to the conflict of interest avoidance, there's also, I've done a little bit of work with anime conventions, and anime conventions have a lot more, there's a lot more interconnection between the anime distributors and the conventions, and large amounts of corporate sponsorship at some of these conventions. A number of years ago, I'm not going to say how many, we were invited to be workmanship judges for the costume competition at Anime Expo when they were trying to rebuild after a particularly bad group of folks running their masquerade. And what we found, we ended up not doing it because we needed to be somewhere else that weekend. And we recommended other friends who would be good at the job for it. But what we learned was, we're talking with the woman who had come back after leaving and then come back to try to patch this thing back together, was that there were things like, we had all kinds of restrictions on what we could do in our judging based on either actual strings attached to sponsorships or de facto strings attached to sponsorships. For example, if we could not name an award, if there were 12 Sailor Moon entries and there was one that was spectacular, we could not name an award Best Sailor Moon because the other distributors would go, but we need equal time for our properties to be mentioned in that. So you can get some. That is a reason. That is something to really keep an eye on in your sponsorships, that your sponsors aren't asking more of you than you are willing to or capable to give.
Just go ahead.
Microphone.
having dealt with this in the past, one of the things you always want to look for is be very careful about their exclusivity contracts. Like we've sometimes seen in cons in Ohio where Pepsi distributorship or a Coke distributorship will say, you can do one or the other, but you can't do both. So you have to be very careful about how exclusive they are. And also you have to look at your facilities too. Sometimes they have exclusivity deals where they can only sell Coke, which I see a lot of that at hotels and function space. So just another anecdote, like you said.
Oh, I just was wholeheartedly agreeing. As somebody who, like I said, most of my stuff in terms of sponsorships and grants is through work on a daily basis. And I work for the city of Albuquerque. We have to be very careful who we agree to go into sponsorship with. It's just, no, and there's always things to factor in. Like I know we've talked about alcohol several times. The museum for a large event every year gets a donation of champagne from one of the local wineries. But that not only involves, us getting the champagne, our cafe has to agree to suspend their liquor license for the entire day for us to be able to serve that champagne because it was not, they are the holders of the building's liquor license. It was not purchased, by them. So even though it's a donation, they have to suspend their liquor license for the day. The winery has to bring in their servers to serve the champagne for the evening. And I mean, and it's the entire 24-hour period. They can't serve beer at lunch in the cafe. They can't, and obviously it sounds like there are very different liquor laws in other states. Yeah. Oh, every state is very different. No, I do know that. But like we could never bring a brewery in to donate alcohol in New Mexico at our convention. Even if they donated, even if they brought our own servers, the entire hotel would have to suspend their liquor license for a 24-hour period for that to happen.
It could be worse. Some states it's illegal to give away alcohol.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's not a problem in New Mexico.
Not a problem in California.
I wanted to pop in and say something positive, though. You have to be very careful on what you're doing. But back to the whole relationship thing, talking about a tech provider and possibly the one Bruce mentioned, you also need to start figuring out what these people want. And sometimes it's really easy. It turned out with this particular tech provider for providing all the extra stuff. Sorry?
Is the microphone on?
It is. It needs to be
Yeah.
closer to her.
Boy, you have to swallow this thing.
That's how we don't get feedback.
When this particular tech person was talking about it, and he was a smaller company, I started going through the things that we could offer and kind of looked for where the eyes were brightening up. It turned out that what he really wanted was enough free passes to show every potential future business customer what he had done for our show. And so these were people who were coming in for 2 or 3 hours using none of our resources. And by giving him an extra 20 or 30 passes to walk people around, he turned up a whole bunch more money.
Just to give another anecdote, last year, one of the things we did, because it was Santa Rosa wine country, is we asked people if they wanted to sponsor the purchase of wine or just to bring in wine. And you guys, of course, brought in a bunch of wine for us to give away. And so that was a very good, it didn't cost either party anything, but it helped the convention conserve their con-suite budget quite a bit.
We can't. You can read it to us.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can't see it really at all.
Go for it.
I will use the microphone to read the comment. Brian says the Glasgow 2024 website and email is sponsored on the basis that the sponsors will be able to use us in a talk.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I'm realizing this is, I'm a little surprised that because Bruce is an accountant, that Bruce isn't hammering on this. But one of the things you do need to be very careful about is you need, in addition to strings, is look and say, are there going to be costs associated with this sponsorship? And is it good a cost accounting to accept it? Oh yeah, yeah, it's on the, because we, yeah, I haven't read it.
I'll circle back to all these.
But yeah, because it's a convention that shall remain nameless had some sponsorship stuff with a television network that shall remain nameless. And what was starting out is, oh well, we're going to get a little bit of money, and we're going to get some trailers, and we can run some trailers, turned into the biggest, most annoying nightmare of dealing with a diva sponsor that was violating policies in the facility that we were in.
Mhm.
So, but I'm not going to name any names unless you
I'll
buy me a
name
drink
names.
later.
I'll name names. One of the things that I did early on when I was first involved in Worldcon running was that I was the person who did a bunch of sponsorship activities, and I worked with the Hollywood studios to get stuff. And the Hollywood studios were always really good about giving us stuff from the very earliest days in Star Wars, with people like Craig Miller, who worked for Star Wars and has just come out with a book. I'll push his book about the production of the very earliest Star Wars. The studios were great, and they would send buttons and hats and all sorts of kitsch for us. And then there was a guy named Jeff Walker, who was utterly wonderful to work with. And so in 1992, when the World Science Fiction Convention was in Orlando, besides having 23 boxes, kitsch in my garage at one point that all got shipped down to Orlando, Francis Ford Coppola came to the convention and showed the rushes and early production rushes for his version of Dracula, and then signed posters for like many hours, and gave us massive amounts of stuff. And it was really completely wonderful. And so if you have an opportunity to do something like that, the question is, what's it going to cost you? And the biggest cost for us was that we had to give up one of our program rooms. And people were going, oh, no, we can't have that big, huge program room in use for this Coppola talk and for these studio movies, because we were getting all the trailers. And the big room that we had was 2,100 people. And I was told, fortunately, after it had already gone away, so I didn't have to kill anyone, that there was discussion about moving this to a 500-person room. We were wall-to-wall people in that 2,100-person room. Mr. Coppola went for hours, for an hour and a half, and then we had all of the material, but it cost us 2 division heads almost coming to blows. And then we were told we could not use the official convention ushers, and because the division head was getting pissy. He's no longer in fandom, so. And so the ushers all said, well, we're all taking a break at the same time, and we'll be over in this room watching the program, and conveniently handing stuff out and making sure people got to their seats. So sometimes the cost is not just in money, but it's also in the people issues and, who's going to kick about anything at any given time.
The other part of that is you also always have to factor in, especially if you have a sponsor who wants to be on site. Do I have staff to be with this person to get them what they need? Inevitably, somebody will forget a cable or a tablecloth, do you have the staff to assign a person to that sponsor? There was a local media convention that no longer exists. And one year I ended up on Friday afternoon becoming their convention liaison to the New Mexico lottery, because they didn't have a sponsor liaison. And the lottery person just needed their handheld and assured that it was okay and that they had everything they needed to set up and someone to run and get them an extension cord. And they were a huge sponsor, the main title line sponsor for this convention. And they had not dawned on them that they needed to have a person to manage this. And I was that year running their costume contest. And I just happened to be in the office when things started to go south. And I was like, do you need me to just be the person? I know how to do it. And they went, go be the person. but it hadn't even dawned on them that that was something they needed. So
I wanted to give another anecdote. This about Phoenix conventions. We for a long time had a gentleman who's unfortunately no longer with us, literally, who always dealt with the studios. He had working relationships. This is both for Comic Con in San Diego, for Phoenix conventions, and for other events. So every year he would end up with thousands of buttons, posters, etc., that he'd bring to every convention he went to. Again, if you were at Comic Con starting up until about 15 years ago, for about 15 years during that time before that, he got all the stuff that Comic Con gave out. And so the value here is an ongoing relationship, someone who has the interest and can lever that for all the conventions. It's not just one convention. Conventions in an area and then ship it out. Getting that relationship is the really valuable part, and having it be year after year after year saves so much work and gets you so much stuff. Since then, I don't think they've ever gotten as much stuff as he was able to get in the way of tchotchkes and all that.
Do you guys do you have your freebies in the same sort of line of reporting as sponsorship? Do you consider, because we get freebies from so many places, you know, from professional organizations? It should be. That's why I'm.
yeah, we definitely do that. We get donations not from studios directly, but from a lot of media companies that do film screenings. So it's same stuff, just different source. And we always credit them as a sponsor and thank them in all of our stuff, you know, program book, that kind of thing.
It's usually part of the official convention organization, and as the structure gets bigger, rather than being a line item with a person in charge of it, they'll sometimes report into a division. I've seen them before chain into finance, because again, it is a lot of financial impact, and you want to make sure this happens and you can rely on it and put in the budget. Other times I see reporting to the chair. It just depends upon what works for the structure of your convention.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in with a few. Okay, this is in some cases, this is the not sexy part of sponsorships and things, but some resources, because conventions are a business. You need to have business infrastructure, in being able to support that without using less of your membership dollars to support the back end that your membership really mostly probably doesn't care about until you screw it up. There are some really useful, probably going to be more specifically applicable to US nonprofits, but is probably to some extent generally applicable to anybody running in a nonprofit type of setup. Your local library probably has a agreement and subscription with lynda.com. That's Lynda. If you search on your library and Lynda, you will probably find an area where you can log in through the library's website using your library card number and PIN number if they do that. They have training on all sorts of things, including a nonprofit management foundations training course, which includes things like how to cultivate grants and cultivate sponsorships, how to solicit, beginnings of grant writing practices, and lynda.com's big fame is that they get industry leading instructors to do their training. If you ever want to do Photoshop training, lynda.com's Photoshop training is run by Julianne Cost, the woman who has run Adobe's photo products evangelism program, and is the train the trainers person at Adobe to train their best folks. So that is a very good resource. You may also get this through work if you're somewhere where they've licensed LinkedIn Learning. So that's a good resource. The other thing is for back end kind of things, for running your committee, for running the business of the committee. There is a donations clearinghouse kind of operation called TechSoup. I got to meet their CEO last spring. and they actually are international. You sign up for TechSoup, you provide them the documentation that you are in your place you do business, that you are something that's eligible to receive donations, and they have a catalog of services and products and things like refurbished hardware that you can get at massive discount for your organization. Oh, it changes all the time. It changes all the time, but your stuff may not always be there. But Adobe has been a constant participant. If you can't afford, if you need to have Adobe, you can get it at the educational and you can get it at the educational pricing of 200 some bucks a year for a license instead of 400 bucks a year for a license. And also there are a few companies that are very, very open about, you can go direct to them, like G Suite for nonprofits. If you want email, file storage, calendaring, all of that stuff in one package and without being data mined because it runs on their education stack.
We're going to need to.
So we do need to
stop.
get
We're
wrap
about
up.
2 minutes left. Deb, do you have any comments you want to make?
Yeah, I do. Just one quick thing. Patty had talked about the need to put together something that says this is what kind of convention we are. This is what we could offer. Work with your local CVB, Convention and Visitors Bureau, and there are ways to document the impact that you've had on your community. So we did. We found that after the first San Jose Worldcon, San Jose's Convention Center had done a whole bunch, Convention Visitors Bureau had done a whole bunch of data capturing, and they could actually document, this is how much of an impact people coming to this into the city of San Jose. And that's brilliant because you can say to somebody, okay, this was San Jose, next year we're going to be in this city, and then the following year we'll be here, and this is the kind of impact that you can expect. And it makes a massive difference for local businesses.
Yes.
I'm just going to echo. I feel like you can't write grants and seek sponsorships if you don't know what your organization mission is, what your organization goals are, and what you are hoping to achieve for your audience out of this funds. If you don't have the answers to those questions, you need to not go forward till you do.
Just as example of the impact, for Santa Rosa SMOFCon, 30% of our budget came from sponsorships.
Wow. There was something that Andy said earlier about Kate Hatcher being very dogged about going after this, after sponsorships. And the honest truth is that you do have to do research, set up documents, and keep after people. And if you have someone that likes doing that kind of dogged stuff, it can turn up some wonderful things, but it really takes an effort.
You need people who like to make phone calls. And even if you can't meet face to face, Kate was in Utah, and a bunch of our folks that we were getting sponsorships from were in the Bay Area. But phone calls and conference calls are the meat of getting a lot of this stuff done.
Any final questions, comments? Otherwise, I think we're all done. Okay, thank you everyone, we appreciate it. And we're more than happy to send soft copies of information on sponsorships. And I'll probably take some notes and send to SMOFCon 37 to distribute like we did last year. Thanks. Thank you, everybody.